Welcome to another episode of Roll or Die. Today's guest is making me a little bit intimidated, to be honest, because I think he's probably our most learned guest that we've ever had on this podcast. I think he has something like 10 degrees. He's got a PhD in psychiatry, PhD in philosophy, qualifications in psychology, philosophy, sociology, history. He's also a really, really good, very experienced martial artist in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He runs his school out of Port Fairy. He's probably well known to many of our listeners. He is actually a professor. We call our coaches professor, but this guy actually is a real legit professor. He is Traill Dowie. Thanks for joining us, Traill.
Pleasure to be here, guys.
And if you're watching it, he's like living up to the hype too, because he's got the t-shirt, but he's got the blazer on. He's sitting in the recliner with the books behind him. So, if you're a little bit unsure, just look at the visual and go, "Fuck, this guy's smart."
Yeah.
You need a pipe.
Yeah, normally we just kind of wing this. I don't know how this one's going to go. I'm already feeling stupid just from being here.
And of course, Brent, of course, most importantly, I'm a Malinois owner.
You are. We had that discussion. So I was just telling Kim, she's like, "Do you know Traill?" I said, "Yeah, I know him a little bit, and I also know that he's a fellow Belgian Malinois owner." So straight away, that puts you in a very smart category. Smart and crazy.
Yeah. Well, before we delve into the mind, which I really would love to explore with you, Traill, let's start with the jiu-jitsu side of things. So, how did you get started in Brazilian jiu-jitsu?
Well, I mean, it's a long story. I've been training since martial arts since I was 8 years old. I started boxing when I was 8. And, did Muay Thai and a lot of karate, Kyokushin and Zendukai and Shotokan and all these things as a kid, and did a lot of Filipino martial arts. But what I stumbled across when I was about 13 was Shuto. I trained with a guy named Hubby Hess once, and he was doing a tour, and I was like, this is the best thing I've ever seen. And that was about the time the UFC came out. And I was like, oh my God. But there was nowhere to train. I grew up in Darwin. There was nothing like it, and I'd never really been anywhere where there was a jiu-jitsu academy. Growing up, there wasn't much of it around, and I moved to Melbourne and did a bit of, had a few conversations with people in the industry. I'd fought Shuto and stuff in Japan, and so been around some of the grappling people a bit and whatnot, and a lot of people recommended Dominance, and I went into Dominance, and I just loved the place. It was awesome. The culture was amazing. That was when Cam Rowe was there and Dave was there, but also Dan Kelly was running his judo academy out of there, and it was fantastic. And so I kind of went just to learn jiu-jitsu. I was like, I'm just going to learn. Didn't tell anyone I'd trained before or done anything before, and just went and got into it. And probably most importantly, got some of my best friends from that, like Dave and Cam are two of my best friends, and love those guys dearly. So it's been it's interesting for me. I've been in martial arts my whole life, and pretty much all my friends are jiu-jitsu people. I don't really have lots and lots of friends in the other martial arts, but jiu-jitsu people are kind of my people. So it's been great. So that was about 14 years ago, I think I went to Dominant. Yeah.
It's a really cool journey, I think, that you've been on too, mate. And with all of the different martial arts, you obviously get different lessons from those martial arts. Is there specific lessons that you've got from jiu-jitsu that you can kind of juggle between the two, or where you sit there and you go, hey, this one specifically?
Well, I would say the best thing about jiu-jitsu is it keeps people very honest. every other martial art, you can kind of delude yourself. Yeah, like if you're sparring and in Muay Thai or something, and someone beats you up, you can be like, oh, they were going too hard, or I was, you can come up with a story. But with jiu-jitsu, it's very real. You get beaten, and most of us get tapped all the time by somebody else, and it's like, God damn it, I just got killed. And
Yeah.
The greatest lesson for me is the humility of it, and that's what I love about it. I feel like it just keeps you incredibly humble, and I think coming from a background where being a very high level kind of competitor and striker, in some ways, um, getting on the mat and just getting completely owned by somebody who was much smaller than me because they could do jiu-jitsu was just like, wow, this is awesome. So yeah, I used to love it. I used to train a lot with the first black belt from Dominance, Byron Silver, and you guys know Byron, but an absolute monster. And I used to really enjoy like beating him up in the Muay Thai class, and then he would just absolutely annihilate, in the jiu-jitsu. And it was great fun. And back in those days, we used to have a pro class on. So a lot of my grappling actually I used to do in the pro class, and there'd be Dave, Dan Kelly, Tiago, Gustavo, Cyborg, all those guys would be there. And, I was just basically just big and just getting smashed all the time. And it was awesome. I used to really enjoy it. And being able to train that hard without sustaining brain injury, I think was a big selling point for me. Yeah.
And Traill, so you've fought in K1 as well, is that right?
Yeah. Yeah, had a couple of K1 fights back in the day and all those things.
Tell us about those.
That was not much to say, really. I mean, I had a few fights. I qualified in the K1 Oceania in 2000, I think. I got into the finals of that, had a few fights and got into the finals of that. And I think it was my second professional fight. I think I fought Gurkhan Ozcan and got smashed.
As
but
everyone
I'd had
did
a
by
lot of,
him.
yeah. It was very intimidating, actually. It was more, I put a lot of that down to, it was one of the only fights I've ever had, actually, where psychologically I was kind of not in the right place. I was very intimidated by the whole experience. It was a lot. And yeah, it was kind of interesting because I'd had a lot of, the year before that I'd placed, I got the silver medal at the World Cup as an amateur. Fought a Russian guy in the final there and lost a split decision there, and had my first pro fight, which was actually a K1 qualifying fight because they thought I'd get beaten up and ended up winning, and then qualified some kind of weird way. Ended up in your second professional fight, fighting in the K1 finals for Oceania. And I just remember being so thankful that I didn't have to fight Mark Hunt. Just
There goes some brain cells if that happens.
Yeah, I'm happy I got whooped by Gurkhan Ozcan and not Mark Hunt. I think I might have lost a couple of degrees if Mark had hit me. So yeah.
And for you, all of this martial arts journey you've been on since you were 8, how has that played out in the real world for you physically? I mean, you're an imposing figure, like you are a big guy.
Yeah.
But people sometimes love to try to take on that big guy, don't they?
It's not really an experience I've had much of, to be honest. I mean, I grew up, the reason I started training is I grew up pretty hard. It was pretty hard kind of place to grow up. So the gyms and stuff I trained in are not the type of gyms you go in today. The gyms that I went to train with is kind of blood and spit on the floor and not really businesses in the normal sense of it. And I guess I grew up training in those environments for a long time, and I was often the smallest person there because I was a kid. I still remember one of the first gyms I trained at. I was 11 years old and I was in the adult classes, and we used to do full contact vale tudo sparring on a Friday, and the first couple of years were pretty rough, right?
Yeah.
So it's not really an issue. I started bouncing when I was 17, and started doing that kind of work, and some of the work that goes along with that, for various in various settings. So I guess for me, violence had been a big part of my early life in many ways. So there was not much distinction between training, fighting, and living. They were all kind of pretty closely aligned for me for a long time. And I think what I'd say about the competitive side is I was never really that actually interested in competition. Like I fought at the level we're talking about with very little desire or ambition. Like I had no desire to be a world champion, or I just used to like fighting. I was like, "You're going to pay me to fight?" Yeah. I'm like, "Okay, well, no problems. Can't get in trouble if he gets hurt. Great." So that was kind of where I was coming from very early on, and it took a while to kind of work that through. And it's been very interesting kind of having trained and supported a lot of kind of the latest, generation of kind of MMA fighters that had come through, and, seeing those young kids with all that ambition and all that desire, and, being able to kind of support them on their journeys, but recognizing, that was never something that I was really that into. I was, I'm not one of those people that I could have been a champion or something like that. I was never that into it. My Muay Thai coach, Richard Walsh, some people might know him. He trained Nathan Corbett and John Wayne Parr and stuff like that. And he said, I'm the single laziest fighter he's ever met. So he used to, I used to I forgot my running shoes every day for 5 years. And his response was to make me do an extra 5 rounds of sparring. And I was like, yes.
Awesome. No running, more sparring.
That's right. I was all about it, So,
and Traill, you've been quite involved with, speaking of juniors coming up, Sean Gauchi and his striking. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, so I trained, well, I guess I'll take credit for discovering Sean Gauchi. I love Sean. I've been with Sean since, since I was at Dominance, really. So since it's been about 14 years, he's 26. So I think he's probably 13 or so, I'd say, or 13 or 14. And I coached him. He's very small and, perhaps didn't get a lot of attention in the gym, but I could kind of really see he had a kind of attitude. I think he inherited actually a kind of competitor's and professional attitude from his father. Darren Gauchi is a very famous jockey, and he kind of put a lot of time into him as a junior and got him his first fight. And I think preparing him for his first fight and seeing the way he fought in his first fight, I kind of knew straight away that he was special. He fought in Adelaide. He was 16, so had his first fight in Adelaide at 16 against a very well-touted opponent, by the way, the promoter's son, and just absolutely dominated this kid, and it was like playing a video game, and as a coach, the most important thing is how well your fighters listen, and he listened perfectly, fought perfectly, but the real thing for me was that he fractured his shin during the fight, and he came back to the corner. He's like, "Oh, Tia, I think my leg's broken." I was like, "Well, that's fine. Just don't kick him with it again. Go out there and do what you're told." And he's like, "Oh, yes, coach." Turned around and went back and just put the hurt on this kid. And I was like, "We're going somewhere." And so I put a lot of time into him and worked with Sean a lot. His last few fights, he was with Sam Greco for a little while, so I kind of handed Sean over to Sam because I had a bunch of health issues. I had a cardiac arrest and a few issues that were pretty significant, and obviously I felt like I couldn't give him the time, and that was an issue with, that's been an issue with Ailish Smith as well, and Michael Manu as well, who I've had a lot to do with, and he was with Sam for I think 2 fights maybe, and then he went to Queensland he finished his degree, and I mean that's an interesting story. He came to me after he finished year 12 and he said to me, "Oh, Traill, I'm not going to go to uni. I'm going to be a full-time fighter." And I was like, "If you don't go to university, I'm going to beat you to death." And he was like, "Oh, I'm going to go do a business degree." And I was like, "You go and do a business degree, and I'll beat you to death." And he's like, "Oh, okay, what should I do?" And we sat down and we worked out that doing something in health, in health and sport would be good for him. So he did chiropractic and he graduated as a chiropractor, and he's got a really great job up in Queensland. And he's gone up to a really great gym up there, Ignite, which is, full of great guys. And, I still help Sean out. I did a bunch of performance coaching work with him. And, for this last fight, many of you will have seen how he went on the Contender. He's just a great kid, just a great kid and a great person. And that's, I've had a lot to do with him, I guess, as his maturation into the man that he's become. So, yeah.
Awesome.
So in regards to mentoring, whether it's mainly fighters, I suppose, but also your jiu-jitsu guys and the garage, the home gym that you have, it's called The Forge. And I've competed against guys who have trained with you that are your students. And mate, I know why it's called The Forge, because these guys don't give you anything, and you're a hard man and your students are hard people. So in regards to the mental preparation that you, how would I word this, put your team through in the gym, obviously a big part of that's your background, but you're a hard man. You don't give things away, do you?
No. And, this is particularly important for combat because nothing is given to you. Everything has to be taken. And so when, if you speak to Sean or Michael or Ailish or someone, particularly MMA fighters, about some of the training that I've put them through, I mean, it's not uncommon for people to be, crying and, vomiting at the same time. But, the old expression or the old adage holds, doesn't it? Sweat in training, and you bleed less, in competition. And we really kind of have always taken that pretty seriously in terms of how we prepare people and making people ready for fighting is big. It's a big challenge in a society where everything's so comfortable, everything's so safe, and so convenient. And very few cultures around the world that are completely civilized produce good athletes in combat sports, perhaps except for Japan is probably the exception. Most people who fight, they're coming from a place where they've had to fight for everything in order to get where they are, and the training has to replicate that. It's got to reflect that. I mean, I would never say that I coach Dan Kelly. I don't think anyone coaches Dan Kelly. I think people help Dan Kelly. He is one of my favorite people in the whole world. And watching him compete and cornering Dan Kelly, I learned so much, from watching someone like that, like the mental toughness and fortitude and the discipline and the things that are involved. That's my idea of what a champion is as well. And champions aren't just people who win, but it's how they win. And for me, like that's super important.
Yeah. And so, sort of on a similar track there, Traill, a lot of people sort of use jiu-jitsu as like an emotional crutch, like a lifeline for them, especially in terms of things like depression and ADD and things like that.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts around that especially from a psychological point of view?
Well, look, I mean, I think anything that helps people is a good thing. And I think jiu-jitsu is incredibly powerful for people. It gives people, I mean, it is probably the only martial art, realistically, where a smaller, weaker, physically inferior person can dominate a bigger person. And it's a superpower in that case. And, to be able to go and learn and obtain that superpower and know that, it's really just a process of being there and going through the process. And it's so well developed as a process now as well. Like even in the time I've been training, 14 years or whatever it is in jiu-jitsu, the changes in how it's coached and how it's taught, and even the art itself has evolved so much. It's crazy, the changes. And I think if it helps people, it's a wonderful thing. But I would say also there's a lot of issue around things like the culture. I don't think all places are the same, and I think I've certainly been to places where I think the culture of the gym is actually detrimental to some people, actually. So I think that you have to have an environment where the leadership is really about creating a community of people where people are accepted as different. Everyone's different. Every body type's different. Everyone's jiu-jitsu is a bit different. Everyone's different. But we're here collaborating and sharing. And it's important to understand that collaboration is the most supervening of relational systems for human beings. Every other relational system can be broken. The attachment system, the sexual system, the competition system, all of them can be broken. But if you can collaborate, if you can come together in a shared vision, you can find relationship and you can find ways of kind of, finding a place. And so I think so often for people, that's what it's about. It feels like a home. It feels like a place that's safe for them to be themselves, and they develop those capabilities. The other thing about jiu-jitsu is, in a good gym, I guess we should say, is that when you get a belt, for example, like you deserve it. Like there's a sense in which it actually is a measure of something that you've obtained and achieved. And a lot of martial arts have lost that. A lot of martial arts have lost that kind of McDojo kind of vibe where everyone just gets graded up and, all those things. It's much better, I think, to be in a situation where people's achievements actually really mean something. And I think you actually rip people off as a coach if you give them things for free. I think there's a real problem with that, and I hope jiu-jitsu doesn't go too far down that path. I mean, I've certainly seen it, but I wouldn't say it's dominant. I wouldn't say it's dominant.
So in regards to that, if you, and this is probably more of a framing of words to give somebody, if you feel that you're in a gym and it's not the right gym for you, what sort of conversation are you going to have with your coach? Like, it's a breakup, right? Like it's a relationship breakup. So how are you framing this conversation where you want to leave on, respectful terms, but that that's not the gym for you?
Well, I mean, you have a conversation requires two people. So it's got to be two parties. There's no point in trying to have a conversation if the other person's not going to have a conversation back. But let's assume that the person's willing to have a conversation. I think it's important to give feedback in both directions. And I think that students need to take feedback, and you don't want to be a student who leaves because they're feeling petulant about something or being childish about it. But if the person's in an environment where they actually feel like it's having a degrading effect on their both development as an athlete but also their development as a person, then I think they just have to share that honestly and move on and find places where the culture is really rich and good. And I've run gyms most of my life and been a part of them, and I think it's really simple. You either have culture corroders or you have culture contributors. There is no interim space. And so culture comes from the top down, and every person underneath needs to be contributing to that culture, and the standards of contribution to culture increase as you climb the hierarchy. So, the contribution expectations of a brown belt are very different from a white belt on their first day. So, for me, any aberration in the culture of a gym, is at an advanced level feeds down. And so, unfortunately, a lot of jiu-jitsu coaches also can suffer from, black belt-itis, that, they've got a black belt and therefore they're experts in every factor of human existence. That's not a good sign either. what you want is your jiu-jitsu coach to be a humble, good person who's there to help and invest in growing his gym or her gym. And, that contribution is what really matters to people.
Oh, come on, Traill. That's the time you can start to give life advice, when you get that black belt. Isn't that what it's about? That's what I thought.
It does happen. It does happen. But
yeah.
And it's not to say there's no advice to be given, but yeah, I think we all know what we're talking about there.
Yeah, for sure. So from what you're saying, then it sounds like you definitely see parallels within like a jiu-jitsu school and like your studies of sociology and things like that. You find those parallels at all?
Well, you think about the word education, right? The word education, means a few things. From the Latin, it means educare, it means to draw out. But if you take it to the ancient Greek, the word derives from the word paideia. So you'll see that on the word, encyclopedia, right? Paideia. And paideia is the maturation of one's soul through death. Right? That's what it means to be educated. To die to what you thought you were so you can become what you could be. And that's what training is. That's what training. And if you go back to the origins of things like philosophy, the philosophers, like they trained and thought at the same place. Yeah, the Lyceum, the place where you would do your thinking, is also the same place where you would train your body. And so, for example, wrestling was a central part of, someone like Socrates was a renowned wrestler. So there's these kinds of relationships between struggle and becoming. So the more you struggle, the more you become. Tennessee Williams has this beautiful line in a piece of work of his called The Catastrophe of Success, and he says, "A man without struggle is like a sword cutting daisies." And really, that's what training is. It's placing ourselves in adversity so we grow. And martial arts holds that as a central idea. One of the martial arts I've had the most to do with is a martial art called Kyokushin. And at the central premise of Kyokushin is this, the idea of the idea of perseverance. This continuance, the plea to one's soul to continue in adversity, because that's how we refine our character. That's how we become what we are. We don't discover who we are when things are easy. We discover who we are when things are hard. And that matters. And in a world where there's very little that's hard, I mean, training becomes just so vitally important for the characterological development of people, I think.
Yeah. I remember listening to someone when they got their black belt, those black belt speeches are always so good. And she said, life is hard, jiu-jitsu is harder. So I think that's pretty accurate. It seems sacrilege to wind this up here, Traill, because we've got so much more to do. So I think we spoke about this before we started recording, that we might make this one a part 1 of this episode, because unfortunately Brentos and I have to rush off, both of us now. But you're a super busy man. Thank you so much for giving up your time. So what we're going to do for our listeners, don't go anywhere. We're going to upload this episode, and then we're going to come back and talk with Traill again next week. So we will definitely be doing a part 2 to this episode, where we're looking forward to delving even deeper into the mind and I guess why we train and all those good things. So as I said, thank you so much, Traill, for giving up your time. Now that we've got the technology sorted, we should be good to jump straight in next week and get that going. Did you want to do, Brentos, do you want to do the wrap up as you always do?
Sure. I think next week, whether we do it whether we bring the episode out the following week, or we just stitch these together, or whatever it's going to be, I'm really looking forward to it. And if you're willing, Traill, it'll be nice to go through one of the reasons that you keep your heart rate so low and stay so heavy when you're on mount, because number one, you on mount absolutely sucks. And I've been in the hole at a grading, and you literally stayed on mount for like 7 minutes. And I'm like, this is a nightmare. And every time I almost escaped, you're like, no, mate, not yet. So to cover that off will be fantastic. Guys, this is a quick episode, but it's full of goodness. Give it another listen, and we'll definitely look forward to having Traill back on next week. But we'll leave it there, guys. Thank you. Remember, like, rate, share the podcast. We appreciate that. Tell your friends about it, and get your coaches into this too. I'm sure there'll be a lot of coaches that'll be picking up some goodness from Traill stuff. So we will see you guys next week on the Roll or Die podcast. Traill, thank you for coming in, mate. I'm looking forward to part 2 of this for sure. Kim, have an awesome night of training, and we'll see you guys soon.
Will do. See ya. Welcome back for part 2 episode with Traill Dowie. He's too good to leave just with us hanging for just the one episode, and it was a bit of a short one, so we are coming back in for part 2 now. Something actually I didn't ask you, Traill. Do you mind if I ask the origins of your name? It's not a name that I hear every day.
Yeah, it's actually my name's actually meant to be pronounced Traill, and it's my great grandfather's name, I think. Yeah, means one who serves in Celt.
Ah, okay. So I've been saying it wrong this whole time, and
Everyone
you
says
just don't bother to correct.
I don't worry about it either. Yeah.
It's funny
Good.
actually, because the first time I met you or heard of you, it was Traill. And so that's how and when I was talking on Link the other day, I'm like, oh, we've got Traill coming on. He's like, who? I went, Traill, you know it. He's like, oh, Traill. I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
I've been saying it wrong all this time.
No, that's the Australian version, right?
Yeah. Ivan was on a super fight a few weeks ago, and they're like, and Ivan is doing, got his grips, and we're like, it's Ivan. They're like, no, they're like, this guy's European. It's Ivan. I'm like, oh yeah, okay, fair enough. Don't come to me for pronunciation.
Yeah.
So I think Traill, we kind of wrapped up last week, and one of the things I was sort of saying is, you and I have trained together a couple of times, and one of the things that super stuck out to me is your pressure from the top, and you really do take your time in jiu-jitsu, like doing jiu-jitsu specifically. You take your time when you're moving around. But there's a bit of a specific reason to that too, right? Can you tell us about that?
Yeah.
Because this is a big part of your story.
Well, yeah, in 2016 I had a cardiac arrest actually. So I had a prophylactic ICD insertion, so an internal defibrillator put in. My father died of something called HOCM, hyperobstructive cardiomyopathy, when he was 36. My brother had some symptoms. I mean, I'd trained my whole life, never had anything wrong. They went in and checked it, and lo and behold, I had it. So I went and had the surgery against my better judgment and against the wishes of a lot of people who, loved me. I had it because I was, really worried that I was going to, just drop dead. Often the first symptom of that disorder is death. And so when I got it done, they unfortunately botched the surgery, sent me home. They'd pushed the leads through my heart and into my lung. And I lost an enormous amount of blood into my chest cavity, and it compressed my heart, and I had a cardiac arrest and died. And I was lucky enough to be in hospital at the time, and they resuscitated me and put me into a coma. I was in a coma for I think 5 days, and I was managed to pull through, and then spend another kind of 10 days kind of on the edge, coming in and out, and was able to kind of stabilize it. But as a result, it's meant that that training's become very, very difficult. It's it essentially means that the doctors haven't wanted me to get my heart rate over 120, and doing jiu-jitsu and keeping your heart rate under 120 is not always that easy, particularly if you're not winning.
Yeah.
So hence trying to go slow and stay on top, and the type of jiu-jitsu I guess that I had to develop. I mean, I think it initially improved my jiu-jitsu immensely, actually, because it just took away every single attribute. So that's kind of difficult to be without attributes, but then also I guess it's meant the way of playing is like I really, as you said, I really just wrestle for position basically, and look to control people. And given that my main interest in grappling has always been connected to, I guess, striking as well. So MMA, it's kind of worked well, but much to much to Dave Hart's disappointment often, given that I do, I think, what he calls prison jiu-jitsu. So
It's well, it does suck being on the bottom, mate. I know that from experience. So it's,
yeah.
yeah.
So, are there any follow-ups with that? Like, is that it, or do you have to keep kind of monitoring
Oh yeah,
forever? And
it's a daily kind of thing. I had a very serious. I actually ended up getting poisoning from the medication that I was on for a couple of years, which has made this year probably one of the most difficult years of my life. I had 34 trips to intensive care this year, so it's
Wow.
been pretty challenging. But I'm on the mend, and I think that martial arts kind of attitude helps. Not to give up and not to be broken down by these things, but to keep responding. And had a few wins lately. I've come off one of the medications, lost pretty much 10 kilos in a couple of weeks after coming off the medication, and so back kind of having a bit of a roll. But I've got a what's called an SID, so subcutaneous internal defibrillator now. So it sits under my left lat here. So I just have to be a bit careful when I'm rolling. If someone kind of tries to knee ride me there or something, it's not very pleasant. But,
For
normal medical professionals, they know that you're doing jiu-jitsu, and they're all cool with that, or
yeah, they are to a certain degree. To a certain degree. I mean, they don't really understand what jiu-jitsu is, right? First of all, like it's
yeah.
hard to explain to them, what it is, unless they have a knowledge or an experience of it. But basically, the big risks are hyper competitiveness, and for me, I've got well, I think is kind of the best coach in the country is Dave Hart, and he just tells me now. I came for a roll the other week, and I did five rounds back to back, and thought I was going to end up in hospital that night. And then last week when I had a roll, he's like, "You can do 2 rounds, Steve. 2, that's it." So,
yeah.
kind of having that, having that kind of, clearly articulated in the room is pretty important. And hopefully, if I do have an arrest, the defibrillator will, turn me into the Terminator, and I'll come back.
Is that something, Traill, that you know when that happens? So, like, if your heartbeat gets regular, like your defibrillator kicks in, like you're
Yeah,
aware of that?
yeah, immediately. Yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
yeah, yeah. It's so there's a number of different dangerous cardiac rhythms, and I unfortunately can get all of the very dangerous ones.
Yeah. Right.
So when you have it, you it's not a nice feeling. So yeah, I try and be super careful, and that's of course makes advancement in jiu-jitsu difficult as well. It's the reason that I've been I think I've been a purple belt, I think, for 9 years or something now. Is because it's just hard to kind of string together proper runs of training, and then when I'm rolling, essentially a heart rate of 120 is the same as someone who's probably 90 years old. That's the maximum heart rate of a 90-year-old. So, not many 90-year-olds doing jiu-jitsu.
No. No. So in regards to, and you just kind of said like you had to change your jiu-jitsu, and then you've also learned a lot about yourself through this, and then how it played into martial arts, and you got through it. What are the big lessons, or what are the big takeaways that you really like, whether it's everyday life, like are there things for you that
Mm,
you've really sort of
absolutely,
applied?
absolutely, no, absolutely. So Uh, I'll talk training, then I'll talk personal. So, from a training perspective, one of my longest running instructors is a guy named Nino Pillar, who is a JKD guy and is an incredible martial artist. And he said to me a number of years ago, he said, "Traill, you need to learn the art, not just how to use the art." And that was a real wake up for me, actually, when he shared that with me, is that I was quite good at fighting, but anytime we focus on being good at fighting, we by necessity disregard whole components of the art form because we only use what's really useful for us. And that's not that good for making us into great teachers, actually. And I think this is why great competitors aren't by necessity always great teachers.
Yeah.
I think they often haven't learned the whole art. And so for me, the challenge has then been, and, Dave and I have spoken about this in terms of my own progression, is about being able to teach people. So, I've got guys that are kind of bigger, heavier, older guys, but I've also got, one guy in particular who's like 70 kilos who, wants to invert and do all this stuff. So, it's taking me a lot of time to be able to, learn and research. I mean, I'm never going to be able to do it, but actually be able to have the kind of technical ability to give the advice. So that's been really important from a training perspective. From a personal perspective, I guess, at the time of this happening, when after I arrested, they resussed me. I was in intensive care and they were about to airlift me to Melbourne, and the doctor who was on told me that I wasn't likely to live and that I needed to say goodbye to my wife at the time and my unborn child. And it's a pretty hard thing to go through. And I guess in those moments I really recognize that what counts, having gone to the edge of those experiences, having died and all that kind of stuff, what really counts is nothing really other than how well we love, and how well we care for people. And that really becomes the measure of everything. And so as a consequence of this, the gratitude that I feel every day, because every day is really an add-on.
Yeah.
Yeah, my father died at 36. This happened to me when I was 38. And, how I managed to survive is, a little bit mysterious, actually. The surgeon who treated me said the only real reason he could see for my survival was that I was so large that it bought me a bit of extra time because I had enough room in my chest cavity to bleed into. And it's probably that kept me alive. And,
Wow.
my heart was as compressed as a pancake by the time I got on the operating table. And he said it's the most compressed he's ever seen a living heart. So, for me, the gratitude has been the central piece. I've had a lifetime engagement with things like meditation and things like that. And you spend a lot of time trying to develop an experience of impermanence that allows you to kind of really value life and have compassion for the life that you live and for others. And, for me, there's an inescapable sense of impermanence, which gives me this profound gratitude for the time I get to spend with people, the people I love, in particular my daughter, but, all the people in my life. And it gives me this incredible pleasure around training as well, because no one really thinks that one day is going to be your last day on the mat. People don't really recognize that. But that day is coming for everybody. Yeah. And, for me, every time I get to roll, it, makes me super happy. I get on the gym at Dominance and I love the people there and I love the culture. And, it's probably, for me, the place that feels most at home, is being in a gym, not in my professional settings, but being in those environments. And it's just an immensely rich and beautiful experience to be able to do that, to have those experiences and to have those relationships and those bonds. And that's something which I think most people don't appreciate until down the track.
Yeah, it's
Oh,
amazing, eh? There's a saying, and it's live each day as if it's your last. And like
Mm,
you literally are doing that every day, right? And it sucks that you've got to go through something like that to, I suppose, not experience it, but to actually encompass it.
yeah,
Like
yeah,
you've got to die before you encompass embracing all these things that you just spoke about.
yeah, exactly. I mean, it's certainly an experience I would put off for as long as possible if I was you guys. Dying.
Definitely the plan.
Yeah, overrated.
well, you sometimes you hear of people that have had similar experiences to you, Traill, but I guess they're often a bit older. They're in their 60s or 70s,
Mm.
and so in some ways, maybe it's almost like a blessing for you that it happened in your 30s and you had that. You've
Yeah,
still got your life ahead of you.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's incredibly challenging, and I mean, but the hardest thing about all of this has been training. I mean, I trained pretty much every day of my life from the time I was 8 years old until this happened, basically.
Mm.
And so, yeah, phew, that's been a big adjustment. And the other one that kind of goes with that with the training is, growing up in a way where the whole purpose was to be, the who's who in the zoo. Trying to be the top the top apex predator in whatever I was doing, and then getting to this point where you can't be,
Yeah.
and having to surrender that. And there's a saying which says there is no such thing as old warriors, and it's an important saying, because being able to transition into other things, being able to kind of recognize that I can't do what I used to be able to do. It's not about me being that person anymore. And so the focus moves on to the next generation of people and supporting people and helping people. And, I guess for me, a lot of that focus has gone into people like Mikey Manu and Sean Gauchi and Ailish Smith and people like that. I put a lot of time and energy into those guys as an active service. But that's kind of hard. I think particularly for a lot of men, I think when you get to a certain age and you realize you really do lose a step, it kind of can be a little bit hard on the ego, you know. So,
Yeah, you
it,
hear that from athletes, don't you? Where they have been, or I think there comes a time like we're like the three of us are all that smidge older, right? There comes a time where you
yeah,
do look back now and you're like, yeah, I'm not quite as quick, or I'm not quite as strong, or I'm not quite as fast, or I'm not quite as
yeah,
bendy,
yeah.
and that that yeah, I probably also won't be getting that back anytime soon.
No, 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 exactly. And so being able to kind of make the adjustment with humility to
Mm,
recognize that. And I think jiu-jitsu is going to face an interesting moment, actually, because we're going to really see the first generation of people moving into latter life while still training. And so how do you maintain respect for
mm,
people when they can't be as competitive on the mat? I think, for all the things that we say, really the reality is that the thing we respect the most is the people. The coach should be able to beat everybody up. you know?
yeah,
But as those coaches from that kind of those first few generations really age out, that's not going to be the case. And so we have to kind of have some cultural change to be able to kind of honor these progressions and say, well, even how do we assess people's belt progression? How do you what's a purple belt look like at 55? I don't how do we measure all those things? So yeah, I think there's lots of interesting intersections there.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And you mentioned earlier about like meditation. So is that a part of your daily practice? Do you do that every
Yeah,
day or?
yeah, most days, and have done for a lot of my life. Um, I think I do, some performance coaching and things like that for athletes, and have done for a long time. And I think that probably the most underdone component for most athletes is their mental game. Most people's mental game is pretty poor, and the component of their mental game which is poor is concentration. Like that's probably the area that most people struggle with, is the capacity to kind of actually direct their mind onto an object, no matter how they're feeling. So, yeah, I've spent a lot of time kind of thinking about that and coaching that, and talking about that in a performance space as well.
So what would you suggest for our listeners who are kind of novice to that? Would you say, give it a go at sort of 5 minutes, 10 minutes a day sort of thing, or
Well,
use guided meditations, or what do you?
yeah, yeah. Well, so there's a bit of a misnomer, right? That meditation is about relaxing. Meditation is not relaxing. Meditation is very strenuous, particularly if you're doing concentration meditation. It's learning to hold the mind on an object is very difficult, actually. And so, we're asking a kind of interesting question there is what should people do? Well, people should learn to stabilize their concentration. Now, the first thing that people should do if they want to get good at concentrating is get rid of their mobile phones. So 48% of the time, according to research, the human mind is absent or wandering. I think that's extraordinary. It's not present to life. It's not present to what's happening 48% of the time. And if we look at concentration rates, they're decreasing at just earth-shattering speeds because of the machines, because of the mobile phones. And so if you want to develop the ability to concentrate, you need to do concentration meditation, which is a particular type of meditation, not mindfulness per se, but concentration meditation. And you need to eliminate the things in your life which cause poor concentration hygiene. And in particular, that's mobile phones. That's probably the biggest one. That's the biggest piece of advice I'd give people.
That's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think for me, Kim and I have spoken about this before, and when you're talking about being able to concentrate for a period of time, we were talking to Cepho on the podcast a little while ago, and we were talking about, yeah, I said the night before I compete, I have a routine or a ritual that I go through, and I jump into bed, I close my eyes, I lie there, and I picture walking out on the mat, slap hands on first, step back, and I go through what the perfect match looks like, right?
Yeah.
But as
Yeah.
I do this, 19 seconds in, my mind's like, wee. I'm like, hang on, you need to bring it back. Remember, like you're getting this grip. This is what you're doing. And I'm like, all right. So now I'm
Yeah.
pulling guard. Now he's in my closed guard. And then my
Yeah.
mind wanders away again. So is this kind of the skill that you're talking about, Traill?
I am talking about it in that regard, but also then actually in the match. You
Yeah.
see, like if you think about what's actually happening in competition, think about how often your mind is drawn away from a focused task. Like think about how often that actually happens inside the contest.
Yeah.
So you get slippages in your attention, you get slippages in your mind, and those slippages can have enormous consequences. How often have you made a small slippage and then been submitted?
Yeah.
Just like bang, it happened. Wow.
Yeah.
And you're like, God damn it, what was I missing? And so it's the capacity to bring your mind into action in the way that you wanted to at the time you wanted to in a meaningful way that really matters. And some people I think are naturally a little bit better at this than others. But as I said, it's probably the most underdone thing in people's training. Like they'll spend hours lifting weights, they'll doing their conditioning, they'll spend hours drilling, rolling, but they'll spend very little time with their own mind. And I think that has a lot to do because a lot of people who do these kinds of martial arts and who compete are doing so to not spend too much time with their mind because they're things they're trying to get away from.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, there's a whole complex picture there. But I think, if I was to give one piece of advice, develop your concentration abilities.
Yeah, for sure. Changing tracks a bit here. I like to do a bit of research if I can. So I hit up Cam Rowe, an old mate of yours, and I have to ask you about the first time that you and he rolled and he tapped you. You
I
tapped him.
I just submitted him the first time I rolled with him.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think I said this to you last week. I went to Dominance and I'd never formally done jiu-jitsu, but obviously I'd done bit of judo. I competed in Japan in MMA and stuff, but never really learned to do jiu-jitsu or grapple properly. And so I really wanted to do that, and I sought out Dominance because by all reports that was the best place to go, and I went and I didn't tell anyone I'd trained before, and I was this like ginormous white belt, and Cam was the coach, and he's like, bumped hands, and I'm like, all right. And I moved into, a kind of Gaza Tatami kind of position and got him in a wrist lock. and he was not happy. And I was like,
Oh.
was that all right? And he's like, yeah, no, it was fine. It was fine. And then he proceeded to spend the next 4.5 minutes beating the absolute bejesus out of me. The start of a beautiful friendship.
Oh.
Oh, that's funny.
Amazing. You'd have a
Yeah,
few stories like that with, people coming into your gym and, I haven't really done too much. I've done something, and all of a sudden you're like, well, you've done a little bit more than what you're saying,
Yeah.
right?
exactly. Sandbagging, I think they call it.
Love it.
Yeah. But that was the development of I said, Cam's one of my very best friends, and had a beautiful friendship and relationship since then. I actually married Cam and Serena, did the marriage ceremony for them and things like that. So
That's right. You're a celebrant as well. I think I left that off your CV at the start of the introduction. So
yeah,
how's that go? You're a busy man.
minister of religion. Yes, that's how I can do it. So yeah,
What's that? What's a minister of religion?
well, just what it sounds like. There's people
Minister,
who are
mate, that sounds like something from Harry Potter, to be honest with you.
someone who is empowered by various religions to administer certain rites by law has the right to perform marriages. So that's why I'm able to do that. So I do that, and I like doing it. It's a good thing, and just do it for kind of people in the community and friends, and I do it for free as a as an act of social service. Yeah.
That's something you're big on, isn't it? That contribution. Where's that come from? Is that a martial arts thing? Is that an upbringing thing?
I think it's a bit of both. I think it's a bit of both, but I do believe that the measure of us as people is what we contribute, not what we take. And I think a lot of people in our society are very focused on what they can get, not what they can give. And a simple definition of love, actually, I think, is often missing for people. Is that love is something that you give, not something that you get. And when we engage in that at a social and relational level, it means contributing and lifting people up and supporting people. And those kinds of gestures really matter. That's how communities are built. That's how we are made better as a people. And, I think today that's often missing from people. You see that a lot with athletes even today. I think there's something really fascinating about that. Growing up and training and seeing the question of martial arts and relationship. And it's not that people should give loyalty to people, without reflection. Of course, I don't think that's the case, but I do think that if people contribute and give and support, that when people achieve things, that should mean something, because no one achieves anything in martial arts without the people around them. These are not, people often talk about martial arts as individual sports. They're not individual sports. You couldn't get a more team orientated sport if you wanted to. This is like, they're the most team orientated sports. Yes, people compete individually, but without a team, you're nothing. Without a coach, you're nothing. Without someone caring for you, you're nothing. Without someone seeing the good in you, you're nothing. And so, yeah, I do believe that that's a really important thing to do, is to contribute and to support and to help. And if you can make this life such that at least one person has lived a little bit easier because you've walked the earth, then it's probably a life worth living. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really, really beautiful. I'm not sure if this kind of leads into another bit of homework that I did from one of your students, actually, that back in your bouncing days, you once told one of them that a bloke shaped up to you back in Warrnambool, saying, "You're in trouble, mate. Do you know who I am? I'm Traill Dowie." And then you laughed and said, "That's funny. That's my name too."
That is correct. Yes,
Wow.
that is correct. That was a very funny moment. Should have seen the look on the guy's face.
So your reputation has preceded you. And then there's another one that when you're bouncing at the stump in Port Fairy, you're on the door, and a guy that you'd kicked out earlier that night
Right.
drove up in his car to the footpath right outside where you were standing.
Tried to run me over.
He jumped out of the car with a baseball bat and came at you, took a swing. You then disarmed him and take the bat to all the lights on that guy's car. Is
That
that
is also true. Yes.
correct?
You've got a lot of inside knowledge.
I've done some. I've done some homework.
I didn't realize that you guys had the inside run here.
Yeah, my husband has competed against some of your trading partners, so your students. So you can thank him for the homework that he's done as
Yeah,
well.
that's funny. Yeah, they're funny stories.
How does it go
Tell
for
us
you?
about that. Yeah, that's like how in a small town, like if somebody walks up and says, "Hey, I'm Traill Dowie," and you're like, "No, mate, you're not. That's me." Like your as Kim said, like your reputation's preceding you. I grew up for a little bit in a small town, so I kind of know what they are like. But there's nobody walking around going, "Hey, I'm Brent Dry." Just back off. Like it's a
Yeah. Well,
different thing, right? So how does that work for
I
you?
think well, it was okay for me, but I think the person who perhaps benefited from the most was my little brother.
Yeah.
he, he he got out of trouble a lot by people saying, "Do you know whose brother that is?" Yeah,
I love
yeah.
it.
No, I mean, I started bouncing. I started bouncing when I was 17, and yeah, it was it it showed me a lot about human beings actually, and taught me a lot about people. Uh, the the exposure uh, to human violence in those kind of settings is also pretty hard to shake in terms of how you feel about martial arts and training, and just the role that it has in making people safe, and I think it's really important. And people often point out that I work as an academic and a scholar and a professor and all those things, but there's um, a Greek thinker, Theodosius, who said a society that separates out its warriors and its scholars has its thinking done by fools, has its thinking done by cowards, and its fighting done by fools. And so, I see them as kind of, a unified field. They've informed how I live and who I am as a person. And, I believe deeply in the value of training and martial arts. And I believe deeply in the role of hardship and character formation. And, I often tell my fighters that, the you have to turn yourself into a war god if you're going to get out there and compete. You have to embrace what this means, and there is a different kind of mentality and a certain kind of focus that's required. And I find that a beautiful thing. I find it inspiring and interesting, and I love watching people in that space and contributing to people in that space. I mean, I mentioned last week one of my favorite people is Dan Kelly, and I still think probably my favorite moment in all fighting was from Dan Kelly. You um, Dan's first MMA fight, he fought a guy from Queensland, a Brazilian guy who's a really high level black belt and good boxing experience, because no one would fight Dan because of his judo background. And the guy came in like 15 kilos overweight, missed the weight,
Wow.
and Dan, being Dan, was like, "No, I'm still going to take the fight," because he wanted to get into the UFC and all that. And he took the fight, and the guy was kind of getting the better of him, but the guy had committed a foul. And second round, Dan was in real trouble. I had to kind of walk him back to the seat. He was kind of out on his feet, and I looked at him and I'm like, "Mate, you just need to win this round, and you're going to win the match." And he's like, "Nah, I'm not. He's beaten me." And I was like, "No, you're going to win. You're winning. It's if you can win this next round, you win the fight. He had a foul. You just need this round." And he literally just shook off the concussion
Wow.
and just like looked at me dead in the eyes and went, "Yes, coach." And he went out there and beat this guy up. Like, it was crazy. It was crazy. It was one of the most like inspiring things I've ever seen an athlete do. You kind of like the fortitude, the characterological fortitude of the man was just inspiring to be around. So anytime Dan needed help, I said, I don't think I would ever describe myself as coaching Dan, I would say I just helped him, because an athlete of that level, is a special thing. And anytime he needed anything, my answer was yes, because I used to just love being a part of that and watching him. I used to just so enjoy him and his character and who he was as a person. Yeah.
Well, you're pretty inspiring to be around as well, Traill, and it's almost come to the end of the time for us. So thank you very much. As I said, you're a very busy man. It took us a little bit of attempts to get here, but we got here in the end. Thank you very much for giving up your time twice now. We will hopefully get you back on again for another episode down the track, because I feel like there's still so much more that we haven't even touched on yet.
Sure.
Brentos, did you want to do the wrap up?
Yeah, number one, thanks, Traill. This has been awesome. It's always a pleasure talking to you, mate. It's always nice being in your company. I've got to say, you are a big man, but you're a genuine, warm, caring, loving person to be around, mate. And every time I'm with you, I feel that. So I want to acknowledge that with you. You give the biggest hugs. You're one of these people who've been around. It really is a nice feeling, mate. So for me, I think we met, I was a white belt. You were very generous with your time to me, and it's always been enjoyable, mate. So thank you for that. Where can people find you? Do you want people to find you? Is there any sort of social media stuff you want to throw out?
Are you active on social media? I tried to add you, and it just sat there pending for about a month.
No, I don't use the social media machines.
Yeah.
My friend, the only thing I have is my friend Brad. That my friend is a dog trainer. He sends me Malinois videos on one of them, but that's about it. So no, I've got a website that people can email through if there's things that people are kind of interested in, kind of more professionally. But otherwise, just come say hello when you see me around.
Mate, that's awesome. And I know
We might see you at
Brad.
the dominance grading.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know Brad, and I know that you guys were putting something together in regards to competition mindset for dog trainers. So the competition mindset for jiu-jitsu people would be pretty phenomenal as well. So if people do need help with that, I'm sure Traill will be able to steer you on the right path. But we'll leave it there, guys. Sorry, go for it.
Yeah. Oh no, I was just going to say I'm going to do something in dominance for that. I was told Dave I'll kind of volunteer to do that for the dominance crew. So, but I'm sure anyone would be welcome to do that when it's on. That'd be great.
Yeah, for sure. We'll keep an eye out for that. That's it, guys. We'll leave it there. We appreciate you listening to our RoD podcast again. Just as a quick reminder, we have our merch. We have our T-shirts, which are in conjunction with Mana Fight Apparel. So check those out. You can pre-order those now. Maybe when this comes out, they're going to be around. So get it in while you can. We'll leave it there. Thank you, Traill. Thank you, Kim. All your research paid off once again.
Thanks, guys.
Peace out. Love you guys. See you soon.
See you guys.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.